The boardroom was filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and polished oak tables. The air was thick with arrogance and power. At the head of the table, James Carter, 52, the CEO of one of the country's largest investment firms, leaned back in his leather chair, oozing confidence and superiority. His sharp suit screamed wealth, and his smirk told everyone in the room exactly who was in charge. Across from him, a black woman dressed in a sleek, tailored navy suit quietly observed the room. Her name, Naomi Brooks, 38, but no one in that room knew who she really was, and that was their first mistake. James glanced at Naomi, barely acknowledging her presence. "Can someone get my coffee?" he muttered, waving a dismissive hand in her direction. A few chuckles echoed around the room. Naomi didn't react. She just smiled. The meeting was about to begin, and in just a few minutes, James Carter would wish he had never opened his mouth. The conference room was filled with top executives, all gathered for what was supposed to be a routine quarterly investment strategy session. James was in his element, talking numbers, boasting about deals, and, of course, subtly reminding everyone of his own brilliance. But Naomi, she was just watching. James glanced at her again, this time with mild irritation. "And who exactly are you?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Before Naomi could respond, Mark Reynolds, the company's VP of Finance, chuckled. "James, she's just here to take notes, I assume," Mark said with a smirk. "Let's not waste time." More laughter. Naomi remained silent. James nodded in approval and went back to his speech about the company's future expansion plans, throwing around big words, bold claims, and even bigger ego. And as he spoke, Naomi waited for the perfect moment, waited for him to dig his own grave. Naomi sat perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on the table, her expression unreadable. Meanwhile, James Carter continued his speech, soaking in the admiration of his executives. "The problem with today's market," he said, adjusting his cufflinks, "is that people think they can just walk into the investment world without experience, without knowledge, and expect to make real money." He chuckled, shaking his head. "It takes a certain level of expertise, a certain class, to truly understand how this game works. And lucky for all of you, you have me leading this company." The room filled with forced chuckles and nods of agreement. Naomi said nothing. She simply tilted her head slightly, observing him. James leaned forward, smirking. "You taking notes, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. A few executives smirked. One even coughed to hide a laugh. Still, Naomi remained completely calm. James took her silence as submission, as if he had already won. He exhaled dramatically. "All right, let's get to the serious business, the real reason we're here." He glanced at his assistant, who handed him a thick investment proposal. "As you all know," James continued, flipping through the pages, "we have a major new investor interested in expanding our firm." Several executives leaned in. This was the deal they had all been waiting for. James grinned. "This investor has serious capital. We're talking billions. And once they sign, our company is going to reach heights no one could have ever imagined." The tension in the room grew. James looked straight at Naomi. "So tell me," he said, crossing his arms, "I assume you're here to fetch coffee or maybe, just maybe, take notes on how real business is done." The executives chuckled. Naomi simply smiled. She reached forward, calmly adjusting the same investment proposal James was holding. Then, in a voice so steady it sent chills through the room, she spoke for the first time. "You're wrong about two things, Mr. Carter." James raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what's that? Naomi straightened her posture, her presence suddenly commanding attention. First, she said, I don't take notes. She leaned forward slightly. Second, I'm the investor you've been waiting for. Silence. The entire room froze. James's smug smile vanished. His fingers twitched against the proposal as his mind raced to process what he had just heard. Naomi placed a hand on the document in front of him. I don't need to take notes, Mr. Carter, she said, her voice calm but powerful, because I'm the one who's about to decide whether or not this company has a future. A hush fell over the room. James blinked, stunned. You're... Naomi smiled slightly. That's right. I'm your new majority investor. The color drained from James's face, and in that moment he realized just how big of a mistake he had made. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear a pin drop. James Carter, the once overconfident and arrogant CEO, sat motionless, his mouth slightly open, struggling to process what Naomi had just said. She wasn't some assistant. She wasn't here to take notes. She was his new boss. Naomi kept her composure, placing both hands on the table and letting the weight of her words sink in. The other executives exchanged nervous glances. They had laughed with James. They had mocked her too. And now they all sat paralyzed, waiting to see what would happen next. James finally forced a laugh, but it was weak, forced, desperate. Now wait a second, he said, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. You're joking, right? Naomi didn't blink. Do I look like I'm joking? James's face paled. The documents in front of him, the investment proposal he had been boasting about all morning, suddenly felt like a loaded gun pointed right at him. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages, desperately searching for a way out. And then there it was. Right there on the first page, in bold letters, majority shareholder Naomi Brooks. James's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a deal. She owned him. The realization hit him like a freight train. All of his arrogance, all of his condescension, every single patronizing comment, every smirk, every dismissive gesture had been directed at the person who now controlled the future of his company. The other executives sat completely silent, watching him unravel. Mark Reynolds, the VP of Finance, the same man who had mocked Naomi just minutes ago, coughed awkwardly, suddenly finding interest in his empty coffee cup. Helen Dawson, the firm's legal director, averted her eyes. No one wanted to be associated with James anymore. James swallowed hard. Ms. Brooks, he started, his voice trembling slightly. This is fantastic news. I mean, I was just... Naomi held up a hand. James immediately shut up. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one in control. Naomi exhaled softly, calm and composed. Mr. Carter, she said, leaning back in her chair, do you know what the first rule of leadership is? James didn't answer. Naomi's gaze hardened. You don't dismiss people before you know who they are. James's jaw tightened. He knew he had been caught. She continued. I sat here and listened to you talk about how it takes a certain level of expertise to run a company like this, she said, her tone sharp. I heard you boast about how no one could match your leadership, and I let you believe you were the smartest person in the room. She leaned forward slightly. But tell me, Mr. Carter, who's the smartest one now? James felt his entire world crumbling. His face burned with humiliation. This was supposed to be his moment, his big deal, his company's next big step. And now He had just insulted and disrespected the very person who could end his career with a single signature. Naomi took a deep breath, then stood up. The other executives instinctively followed suit. James hesitated but realized he had no choice. He pushed back his chair and stood, his hands clammy, his confidence completely shattered. Naomi looked around the room, making direct eye contact with each and every one of them. "This company is about to change," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. She turned her gaze back to James. "And so is its leadership." James stiffened. "Ms. Brooks, Naomi simply smiled. And at that moment, James Carter knew he was finished. James Carter sat in paralyzed silence. His fingers twitched against the polished wood of the conference table, his confident smirk completely erased. Just minutes ago, he had owned this room. Now, he was powerless. The executives who once laughed along with him were now dead silent, their faces tight with unease. Naomi Brooks sat perfectly composed at the head of the table, the seat that, until today, had belonged to him. She straightened her suit and folded her hands together, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice calm, controlled, and dangerously firm, "this company has been running under your leadership for over a decade." James swallowed hard. "And during that time," Naomi continued, "I have been watching." James frowned slightly. "Watching?" he echoed, his voice suddenly hoarse. Naomi leaned forward slightly. "Yes," she confirmed, her sharp eyes never leaving his. "For years I have observed the way this company operates, the deals you close, the decisions you make, the way you treat people." James felt a chill creep down his spine. Naomi exhaled softly. "And let's just say, I'm not impressed." A heavy weight fell over the room. The other executives shifted in their seats, suddenly realizing that they too were being judged. James gripped the edge of the table. "Ms. Brooks," he started, his voice strained, "I assure you, I have always made decisions that are in the best interest of this company." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Oh, really?" she mused. "Tell me, Mr. Carter, was it in the best interest of this company when you ignored potential investors based on your personal biases?" James's face twitched. The room was suffocatingly silent. Naomi continued. "Or how about the 2 lawsuits filed against this firm for discrimination last year? Was that also a strategic decision?" James's jaw clenched. Naomi tapped her nails lightly against the table. "Or," she added, "when you dismissed an entire team's proposal simply because one of your executives suggested that a woman might be more qualified to lead the project." James's face burned. The executives held their breath. She had dug deep. She had done her research. And now every single one of his failures was being laid out before him like a list of charges in a courtroom. James licked his lips, trying to regain control. "Ms. Brooks," he started again, attempting to sound composed, "I believe we may have had some misunderstandings in the past, but—" Naomi held up a hand. James froze. "I don't deal in misunderstandings, Mr. Carter," she said smoothly. She slowly stood up, her presence commanding the entire room. James instinctively pushed back in his chair, as if trying to create distance between himself and the inevitable. Naomi walked to the massive glass window that overlooked the city skyline, hands clasped behind her back. "You built this company, James," she said. "I'll give you that." James let out a shaky breath, thinking maybe, just maybe, he could salvage this. "But," Naomi continued, turning back to him, "you built it on arrogance, exclusion, and outdated business practices." James flinched. "This company deserves better," Naomi stated. "The employees deserve better. And the future of this firm demands better." She took a step closer. "And that starts today." James felt the blood drain from his face. Naomi's voice never wavered. "As of this moment," she declared, "James Carter is officially removed from his position as CEO." The room erupted in stunned gasps. James stared at her, completely motionless. "What?" His voice cracked. Naomi did not blink. "You're fired, Mr. Carter," she repeated, her tone cold and final. James shot up from his chair, knocking over his coffee cup in the process. "You can't do this," he roared. I built this company." Naomi calmly gestured to the security team. The doors to the boardroom opened. 2 security guards stepped inside. James went pale. "This isn't necessary," he sputtered, backing away from them. I can change. I can fix this." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I gave you an opportunity to show who you were today. And you did. Loud and clear." She nodded toward the security guards. "Escort him out." James panicked. He turned to his fellow executives, the same ones who had laughed alongside him just an hour ago. But now, they refused to meet his gaze. They wouldn't save him. James turned back to Naomi, his voice cracking with desperation. "Please, don't do this." Naomi's expression remained unreadable. "Goodbye, Mr. Carter." The security guards grabbed him by the arms. James struggled, but there was nothing he could do. As he was dragged toward the exit, he looked back one last time. And what he saw, Naomi, standing at the head of the table, in his chair, in complete control. And as the door slammed shut behind him, James Carter knew he was finished. As Naomi stood at the head of the conference table, she didn't feel triumph. She felt clarity. This wasn't just about one meeting. It wasn't just about James Carter. It was about power, respect, and the consequences of underestimating the wrong person. For years, people like James had controlled rooms like this, dismissing others before even learning their names. But today, that cycle ended, and Naomi, she wasn't just taking a seat at the table, she owned it. If this story inspired you, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more powerful stories like this one. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update, and join me as we uncover more tales of resilience, justice, and redemption. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.